Hello and welcome to the Bravas Luxury Living Podcast. On the Luxury Living Podcast, we explore ideas and thoughts around how to build and automate the best luxury home you can. Every week, we talk to guests or we talk to other Bravas team members about ideas and thoughts that you might find useful. If you do, please subscribe to the podcast, share or like it, and let other people know that you found it. With me, as ever, I have from Dallas, Keith Brown. Hey, Keith, how are you?
As always, happy to be here.
Good. Well, listen, Keith, this is a subject that I'm very excited by because in the last year I've heard one name I think more than I've ever heard before, and we're going to talk to the owner of that, at least that product name, and it's a pleasure to ask. And we discussed this before the show. I'm going to butcher this name, Alex. You say I can't even do it now, Alex. We're just going to call you Josh from JoshAI. Alex, hey, how are you? Thank you for joining us, Alex.
I'm great. It's Alex Capecelatro, but most people just call me Josh, so that works too.
Well, Josh works. I'm worried about calling you Josh in case I cause something to happen, but we'll discuss that in a minute. Before we get into who JoshAI is, Alex, maybe a bit about yourself. Tell us how you got here.
Sure. I'll give the quick background, but let me know if you want me to go into more detail because there's a long kind of fun story. So a couple bullet points. Grew up in upstate New York. When I was, I think, 11, I was diagnosed with diabetes, which is relevant because that was the beginning of my fascination with technology. If not for modern medicine and devices like the insulin pump, I really wouldn't have been able to live a normal life. So I was getting excited about technology. I was growing up. I got into some different hobbies. And I started just writing code when I was probably 12 or 13. Built a website that did pretty well in its own right. Ended up dropping out of high school to go work for the government. And I just spent a number of years working in different really fun industries, everything from electric cars to government-funded research projects, bioengineering, mechanical engineering, lots of different things. And so what I found was I always loved the combination of software and hardware to solve really interesting and really exciting problems. But I never really thought about the home space as a place that I would settle in until about 6 years ago. And so what had happened was I had sold the software company. I was looking to kind of figure out what was next, and I was renovating a home in Beverly Hills. And I started just realizing all of the amazing opportunities, but also all of the ways that we in the smart home space could really impact people's lives. And so this is everything from modern trends today like health and wellness and energy management. You've got sustainability and obviously entertainment, be it streaming video content or audio and music content. It just started becoming more and more clear to me that utilizing software and specifically machine learning and artificial intelligence with really cool hardware could open up some opportunities, not just for everyday, sort of applications in the home, but it gets really exciting when you're dealing with someone who's maybe in a wheelchair, or they're blind, or they're dealing with different types of family dynamics, or they're just getting older and they want to live in their home for longer. And so I got really excited about 6 years ago, and the way that I kind of dove into the space was a few things, but it looked like you wanted to jump in there.
Well, I was going to say I wanted to explain what JoshAI was, but I actually thought rather than me try and explain it, let's give some context. How you describe what JoshAI is? Sure.
So first and foremost, JoshAI it's a business, right? It's not just a voice assistant or an AI. It's a business, and what we're focused on is delivering extremely intuitive and natural interfaces into the home. And so voice is a piece of that. Certainly being able to say things like play the Beatles, open the shades, turn on the lights. Those are natural interfaces that we care about, but we're also very excited about true automations, ways that the home can intuit what you're looking for. And so at JoshAI, what we're focused on is working with amazing other companies that produce both hardware and software platforms to organize an experience for the user that's just magical. We want to figure out, how do we take all the complexity and all the headache out of controlling your home and just make it as delightful as giving a voice command?
So given that, let's spend a second on the obvious comparison, the difference between as a voice assistant, something like JoshAI, and something that I could buy for a few $100 or less from one of the large retailers. How do you explain at a broad sense, what that difference is?
Yeah, so the main thing that you want to keep in mind is when we started the business, there was no Amazon Echo, there was no Google Home. These products just simply didn't exist. And as a result, we were focused extremely hard on our customers and the use cases that we're focused on, which is the professionally installed channel and homes where you have potentially hundreds or thousands of connected devices. And as a result, the feature set that we built for Josh is really all about this particular market. So what that means is we care a lot about privacy, we care a lot about stability and reliability, which means being able to hardwire devices, power them over PoE, easily remote diagnose what's going on and check on them. But also the use cases that we deal with, unlike a mass market assistant, you might have dozens and dozens of rooms where the rooms have distributed audio and video content that needs to be routed. We spend a lot of time making that extremely simple. So what I mean by this is in the Josh environment, someone can walk into the kitchen or the living room or the bedroom, and they can simply say, play Chopin or watch the Weather Channel, and we're going to power on the right amps, we're going to switch the right switchers, we're going to find that content, we're going to deliver that experience. And you never need to specify where to do it because our system's room aware, it remembers context. And again, it's all privacy focused, so you don't need to worry about who's listening or where the data is going. And what we find is by focusing on this set of user experiences, the differences between what we do and what the mass market assistants do is actually pretty staggering, because you have to think about what's the underlying business behind an Amazon or a Google. They're trying to deliver, lots of different queries that really don't apply to what we're trying to do in the home. For example, you can ask Google how many stars are in the universe, or you can ask Amazon to order some toilet paper. But if you want to give a voice assistant a reliable command to control your AV equipment or your shades or your thermostats, there's going to be no better system than Josh.
And I guess it's a question of scale, isn't it? And you sort of said this. I mean, Bravas recently did a house, I think, that had over 100 shades in it. So saying open the shades is a pretty meaningless thing, isn't it? Unless the system's aware of what room you're in or the context in which you're asking the question. Does that make sense?
That's exactly right. So what we find is when you're dealing with a small system, maybe a test environment or, an Amazon Echo in a dorm room or something, saying to turn on all the lights or open all the shades is perfectly reasonable. When you're in a 50,000 square foot home, when you say turn on all the lights or open all the shades, that's an entirely different scale. There's a lot more going on. But the other thing that you want to think about is voice control is really, really difficult to get right because we all have different dialects and accents. There's different background noise that changes the way microphones hear us. And as a result, there's a lot of pattern recognition that's done to try to map what the audio coming in is to what words we think you're saying. When you're dealing with something like a mass market assistant, the universe of vocabulary is pretty unbounded, meaning you might be asking to send a text message, you might be asking a question about something very nuanced, you might be asking about an Olympic athlete with a name that's fairly specific. And as a result, there are a lot of words that end up not getting heard quite right. Think about your examples with Siri. How often does it misinterpret something you're trying to say? Example, this would be the word wood. Is it W-O-O-D or W-O-U-L-D? Well, it depends on the context. And so the mass market assistants don't have a lot of context to fit the words to what you're trying to do. With Josh, we're hyper focused on the smart home. And so what that means is when we mishear some of the vocabulary, we're patching it, we're fitting it to a model. Some examples include our system will hear open the grapes. If someone says open the drapes with an accent, or maybe there's background noise or music on, we understand open the drapes equals, or open the grapes equals open the drapes. We do the right thing. With the other assistants, they don't make that assumption because grapes could make perfect sense in other contexts. So we actually find by confining the vocabulary of what we're trying to do, our accuracy goes way up.
That's a really interesting differentiation, because I found one of the things that blows me away about the capabilities of those mass market assistants is the types of random things I can ask and get some kind of answer. That is really interesting to me. But I find that using it in my home to control my devices, because I have an Amazon device tied into our system just to see how it worked because I got it as a gift. There are cool things it can do, but it is very hit and miss as to whether or not it's going to work. And because of that, I would rather just walk over to a touch panel or pull out my phone or use a widget or whatever it is, because doing it twice is frustrating. It's really interesting that you've managed to make it more powerful by confining what it can do. I mean, is that, I guess, kind of what you're saying you've done?
Exactly. And it goes so much deeper. So, for example, one of the really tough commands to get right is a command like turn it up. If you're in a room, turn it up could be the light brightness, could be the thermostat temperature, could be the music volume or the TV volume. We're maintaining state of every device in every room so that when someone says turn it up, we can figure out, oh, they recently gave a music command, it's probably the volume. Or the only thing on in this room is the lights and they're at a 50% brightness level. Let's turn up the brightness. The intuition to do that properly involves a lot of context that the mass market assistants aren't focusing on. The other thing that's really interesting about that is in order to sort of maintain state, we also have to get really granular at disambiguating what commands are coming in. So an example of this, because I know that might sound a little abstract, you say the command turn on X, where X could be anything. Turn on the kitchen or the living room as a room, turn on the chandelier or turn on the TV as a device, turn on my good morning scene or turn on my good night scene. Or you could say turn on the Beatles or turn on Breaking Bad for music and for video content. Well, that's a really hard problem to solve because after the turn on command, what you're saying next could map almost anything. So for example, if you say turn on Breaking Bad, the right thing is to probably open up Netflix and go right to the Netflix show. But Breaking Bad maps to some stuff on Spotify, certainly maps to stuff on YouTube. And then what do you do if you have a room called Breaking Bad or if there's something else that's going to match it? So we've created an entire knowledge graph that allows us to say, when ambiguous statements come in, let's figure out how to label that content. This is likely an artist. This is a piece of video content. This is a device. This is a room. And it's not just what exists in that home, because you might not have a kitchen in this home that's been labeled as such for any number of reasons. But if someone says turn on the kitchen lights, we actually go and say, oh, there's no kitchen, but there's a breakfast room. We understand that the breakfast room is usually the kitchen. If there is no kitchen, we'll turn on the breakfast room lights. And that magic is part of what makes Josh just seem so much superior to the other assistants.
It really is like magic, because one of the biggest issues we have in our home is my wife and I vehemently disagree on whether or not we have a living room or a family room. And since I programmed the system, it's called family room. And whenever she wants to do something like turn the TV on, that's not natural for her. She wants to say living room. And so the only option for her is simply don't use it. And even though those devices are cheap, that really does confine them to being toys, not tools.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think what those products have done is so amazing for the market, the awareness it's created. We see a lot of demand from people saying, I love that I can voice control certain things, but I want it to be more natural. I want it to do more. I want it to be privacy focused. And so in many ways, we're riding the coattails of some of the biggest companies in the world, and we're just focusing on a niche that, in my opinion, is still a very big and important one. But it's, the success of those products that have allowed us to get here.
But does that mean you have to go through a stage of, when you install this, agreeing what every room is called and what every scene is called? I mean, how does that affect how you set this thing up?
So there's a lot of automation that pulls in, and then you can fine tune and get as granular as you want. So for example, if there's a Control 4 system or a Crestron system or Lutron or Sonos or any number of products, we discover those systems on the network and we pull the configuration in based on how those are labeled. But when we pull that in, we're actually making small changes. So for example, if we see that there's a room called the master bedroom, we understand that that also matches to the master bed or just the master. And if we understand that there's a master bathroom, depending on how it's labeled, when you're in the master bedroom, if you say turn on the bathroom lights, we understand that those rooms go together. So it's the bathroom tied to the master, not, for example, the guest bathroom. The other thing is, if the room name that gets pulled in is, for example, the gym, we understand that there are different common synonyms people have for it. So if you say turn on the lights in the fitness room or the workout room, we're going to tie that back to the gym without you having to do anything. So there's a lot of automatic sort of aliasing that we do that just makes things work. But then you can always go in and say, in addition to the guest room, I want to call this, I don't know, Sean's home office, because maybe that's how you use that room. There's no way that Josh would know that, but you can give rooms as many nicknames as you'd like. So if one person says, turn on Sean's home office, that will do it. If someone else says, turn on the guest room, that will tie back to the same room. So it really just comes down to how much time do you want to kind of, fine tune the system if you need to. We also find, though, it's easy to make these changes right from the Josh app. Some dealers give it to the client and they say, hey, as you're using the system, you can put these in yourself. And so for a more tech savvy client, they like that freedom. For other clients, they like that the integrator can do it for them. So it just depends.
And so does that mean Josh is the last thing I should set up in my smart home or the first thing? Where are you in that sequence?
It's a great question with a very simple answer, but I'm going to give a slightly more expansive response. The simple answer is yes, Josh should be the last thing you set up because the other stuff that you do paves the way to making Josh really easy. That being said, there are two caveats. The first one is we actually wrote a white paper in conjunction with Lutron on best naming practices for your lighting and shade devices and your rooms to be optimized for voice control. Because there are a number of things that if you program properly at the Lutron level or Control 4 or Crestron, it makes the voice piece later that much more seamless. It sort of makes everything more automatic. The other caveat that's important to address is because you do your setup for Josh last, some people introduce Josh to the client last, and they actually end up underselling the system. So for example, if you reverse that and you say to the client, I'm going to tell you about Josh first, and let's walk through where do you want to be able to give commands like play some music, turn on the TV, turn on the lights, open the shades, you find that the client starts saying, oh, I want to do that in every room, right? I want that in the kitchen, in the dining room, in the office, in the library, and it goes on. And that allows you as the integrator to sell more technology than the client would otherwise think they need. So we find if you lead with Josh on the sales front, you actually get bigger projects, but then you want to install it last as you had suggested.
So one of the things you mentioned that I thought was really interesting is trying to create great hardware and great software that work together. And one of the first companies I ever personally experienced doing that was Sonos. They, would say that they're a software company, but then they're building these really beautiful, really robust, good sounding speaker systems that would compete with companies that have been around for 30 or 40 years. And they were just new to the market and already building good hardware. So I say that to say, we've talked about what Josh can do, but we haven't talked about what the hardware looks like what the client would have in their home. Can you describe that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to give some context, when we started the company, we thought that we were going to build a pure software company. A lot of my background's in pure software. My business partner is a software guy. And what we found was over time, it became more and more apparent if you want to really have end-to-end encryption, privacy, and luxury performing products, it's hard to rely on just third-party hardware. I mean, in fact, there was no third-party hardware that could do what we needed it to do. And so about 2 years into the company, we decided that we were going to invest in building hardware. And to your point, there's a really good keynote from Steve Jobs back in the day where he has a quote from a guy named Alan Kay that says, those who are really serious about software build hardware because that's what's going to deliver that software package. And so we decided early on that we needed to build a hardware product that had very good microphones, local storage, could do most of the processing embedded, meaning on the device, not going out to the cloud. We needed to have a good enough speaker to hear the Josh response, and on and on. There were a lot of requirements that we had. And so the first product that we came out with is what we call Josh Micro. Josh Micro has been in the market since 2017. We shipped, thousands and thousands of these. They're, active all over the US and Canada. And Josh Micro is a pretty bulletproof product, but it's sort of a all-in-one. It works if you need to wall mount. It works if you need a desktop. It works if you want to be hardwired to PoE. It works if you want to be plugged into an outlet running on Wi-Fi. It's a retrofit option or it's a new install option. It's kind of your, can do anything type product. But the request that we kept getting after we launched Micro was, What about systems where we can be a little more specific? We want really high quality built-in speakers for delivering the response. We want a third-party processor so that we can do even more processing locally, make things even faster. But ultimately, we want this device to be as seamless and embedded into the room as possible. And that's what allowed us to get to a new product that we announced in November, plan to ship pretty soon, and it's called Josh Nano. And so Josh Micro is about the size of a Nest thermostat. It's a relatively small device, but it's certainly not invisible. Josh Nano is, as far as we understand, the world's smallest far-field microphone. It's about the size of a quarter. It basically gets installed right into a wall. It looks kind of like a remote temperature sensor. And this device is so powerful, but also very small because it doesn't have a processor, doesn't have a speaker, and it allows for that, design-forward architectural solution. And so those are the two main microphone products today, Josh Micro and Josh Core. And then Josh Micro and Josh Nano. The processor to make Josh Nano work is what we call Josh Core. And that's a rack-mounted processor that is able to do the audio out, and it does all the voice processing right on the device.
It's interesting because the things you're describing that you're creating are almost the opposite of what the mass market devices are, because you really are selling to our clientele, which a lot of times is the specifiers, the architects, the designers, the builders. And it is just neat to see a product that is so ahead of its time in our industry. Whereas I feel like a lot of times we're lagging behind, but then trying to build something better or something that's more well integrated into the house. And in this case, I feel like we're kind of ahead on both fronts.
That's absolutely spot on. It's been really fun. I mean, from the hardware perspective, the mass market assistants call the category smart speakers. And we've always hated that because we don't want to be the speaker. We don't want to be playing music off of a little puck. Our industry is built on beautiful, floor standing speakers or built-in ceiling or in-wall speakers. And you're never going to compete with that level of audio with a puck. It's just not going to happen. And so for us, it's not that it's technically a difficult problem to solve. It's that it's a problem that the mass market companies just aren't really focused on. But to one thing that you mentioned that I think is interesting, on the voice side, you definitely do have a lot of, copycat type actions. And we've just had a lot of fun with this because we were the first company to do compound commands, which is more than one command at a time. Historically, if you want to say to Google or Amazon, turn on the lights and open the shades, those are two separate commands. You have to give the wake word twice. We've got, patents and a lot of IP around. You can string together as many commands as you can think of. You can walk into a room and say, turn on the lights, open the shades, turn on the TV, play some music, turn on the fireplace, and, what's the weather? And it'll do all of that as a single command. Well, years later, we're seeing the other guys starting to catch up on some of that. But then there are other things that we're so far ahead on. So it is really fun kind of being at that forefront of innovation and watching these huge companies that, as many engineers as they employ, they're just not as hyper-focused as we are. And they're trying to do so many other things. So look, we're not going to be able to answer every question that Google can answer. It's not our goal. But we're so far ahead in terms of home control.
One of the things, though, I think you did mention earlier, which I want to go back to, is the thing that scares me about... Okay, hold on. I shouldn't be. Can you hear me now? Okay. One of the things I did want to ask about, which we did talk about earlier, was privacy. So one of the things I'm scared of, and one of the reasons why I'm avoiding some of these consumer devices, is I think whatever I say is going to be delivered in the mail to me the next day. So how do you approach the privacy and those sorts of issues with clients?
Yeah, so there are two sides to it. The first side is really building trust and a reputation and understanding why the business makes sense to be a privacy-focused business. And then the other side is the technology side. So on the business side, it's pretty evident when you think about Google's all about harnessing data to, figure out how to solve other problems. It makes sense that they're listening and they're utilizing that data for other things. And they also run the largest ad platform, in the world. And then Amazon, it's a similar story. Everyone understands Amazon wants to better understand the client to better target product recommendations. And so there's an inherent trust issue that's going on. Also, those products are basically free. And I think we've come to learn through Facebook and other, types of companies that if a product seems like it's free, it's because the product is you. Your data is what you're giving up for that essentially free service. In the Josh case, we've always been very clear. The business model is, look, we're selling you high-end hardware. We're selling you world-class software with a software license. You're paying for the system, but the net result is you're also paying for protection. You're paying for your data to not be leaked, your data not to go anywhere. And so there's the very clear business case that we're not ever going to be targeting ads at our customers. We're not ever going to be trying to deliver other products. And so there's not the fear of that. The other thing is it takes a lifetime to build trust and only one moment to lose that trust. And we've all heard stories of companies, especially Amazon and Google, where they've lost trust because they've done something that the media's picked up on that, quite frankly, there's no excuse for. You can't recover from some of the things that they've had happen. In the Josh case, we pride ourselves on we've never once had a leak. We've never once had anything get out. I pray that never happens. We put a lot of safeguards to make sure it can't happen. We also understand the internet's, fallible. Things can go wrong. That being said, we've spent now 6 years building a reputation of 100% perfect privacy. We have not ever jeopardized a client's data in any regard. And so that's something that we'll continue to build on and we'll continue to focus on. But it is the type of thing where it just takes one breach to lose that trust. And we spend a lot of effort making sure that that's very unlikely to happen.
But one of the things I guess does that is because the instruction is processed remotely, locally, you're not having to go to the cloud to have some server somewhere else do that analysis, are you? That's one of the other security things here.
That's mostly right, but unfortunately, it's a little more complicated than that. So what's happening is we do unfortunately need to go to the cloud if we're streaming Netflix content, if we're streaming Spotify music. Certain integrations do require the cloud. But in addition, when you ask what's the weather in Paris, we have to go out to the cloud to get the weather information. If you ask Josh for the stock price, there's a lot that does require the cloud. So while we do make a trip out to the cloud, we do it through end-to-end encryption. We do it in a way where we're only passing through the necessary data. For example, we're never passing through the client's information or who they are. It's never tied to the data. But the other thing is we then store the data when it is stored locally in the home on the server. And what's kind of cool is we introduced a feature. It's effectively an incognito mode where there's effectively no value in having voice commands stick around forever. I shouldn't say no value, but there's diminishing value as the time goes on. And so we give dealers the option for every single server to say, I want to store my commands either forever, for a month, for a week, for a day, or never. And the reason you might want to say for a day or for a week is that if the client calls you up and they say, hey, I tried running my dinner time scene, it wasn't working. They look at the logs. The log shows they didn't say dinner time. They said, it's time for dinner. Those to a human might seem the same, but to a computer, those are different. They can go in and they can make those changes. So the logs can help, but you don't need those logs to stick around forever. For our clients that are very data and privacy focused, that's where you can say, I don't want anything to ever be recorded, not even for an instant. And so you basically can turn on what we kind of internally refer to as Snapchat mode, the idea of disappearing messages, where you say to Josh, I don't know, watch Breaking Bad or turn on the lights or play some music. The command happens and it never gets stored to a database. And so you've got those options. I personally have my commands stick around for about 30 days, but it's because I like to go back. I like to see what's going on. I like to see if, things are, being misheard, how other people are using it. But other folks like to say, don't store my data. I don't really care about the logs. I just really don't want there to be any evidence of anything that got listened to.
So when I first heard that you guys did compound commands, we weren't a dealer, and I basically ran into the office to say, guys, you have to check this out. This is one of the things that's missing. It's one of the key things that our system now can't do. So you live with this system, obviously, when you created it and you live with it. Is there anything about it that surprised you or kind of felt like magic to you when you were using it? Because I imagine you know its capabilities, but I'm assuming there are some things where you just went, I didn't even think I would use it like that, but I do.
It's such an interesting question because, like a lot of things, the very first time you see something, it is magic. It blows your mind. And the more you live with it, the more you get used to it. And so for me, what's been interesting is looking at some of the habits and the trends that have been kind of life-changing, but also just things I would not have expected. So a couple of those, for example, include any command that you can give to Josh, you can time to a timer or schedule. So instead of just turn on the lights and open the shades, I can say in 5 minutes, turn on the lights, or at 6 p.m., open the shades. And I can tie that back to any command that I can give Josh. And I'm amazed on a daily basis how often I'm giving commands like that. For example, I live in a house that's very sort of open, lots of windows, lots of transparency. And so I close my privacy shades in the morning when I'm getting ready, when I'm in the shower. Well, what I've been saying to Josh lately is, in 30 minutes, open all the shades. And that way I know I can, take a shower, get ready, because I go right into meetings. And I don't need to think about it when I want the thing to happen. I just know the shades will open up after I've been done with that. So that's been really interesting. Another one that was a customer request was the audio. So basically, the voice response back, you don't want it to be at a fixed volume all the time. During the day, when there's more noise, more going on, you want the system to speak back louder. But when you give a command at 2, 3 in the morning, you find that people don't want to give a voice command because the response back is going to get really loud. So we built out what we call whisper mode. And whisper mode, allows me to basically go whisper a command. The thing happens, Josh whispers a response back, but I'm not waking up the house. And I'm waking up at 4:30 most of the days because I'm going on these runs at 5 o'clock. And I'm just amazed how often I forget that I set whisper mode, but I appreciate that it's working because it's, not waking up the house and it allows me to still give my commands. So there's so many little things that I live with that, are just exciting. But the last one that comes to mind, just because it's really a fun one, we built a super deep integration with YouTube where if you basically ask Josh to pull up video content that exists on YouTube, we'll be able to find it. And we're looking at how popular is the video. We're looking at how recent's the video. So for example, if a huge storm happens to be hitting Denver, if you were to say to Josh, show me videos of the storm in Denver, it'll go to YouTube and it'll preferentially pick videos that are maybe of the last 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, they're very current. But what I love is when I have guests over, I'm often thinking, where do they work? What are some of their favorite hobbies? And I'll just say to Josh, show me a video of their company. Or if there's someone who I think has videos of them on YouTube, show me videos of John Doe giving a talk. And it's just a kind of mind exploding thing when someone sees that. And it just starts getting them going, well, does it know this? And can it do that? And, it's just such a fun thing. And we understand we can do that with YouTube on a computer, but having that as a hands-free voice experience in your living room is just a really cool thing to experience.
So Alex, if someone's watching this podcast, they're probably at the point where I am now, which is, okay, I want one. What do I do next? What's the sort of process we should be going through, a consumer should be going through to get JoshAI in their home?
Great question. We decided pretty early on in the company that we were going to restrict availability of the product through certified installers, because at the end of the day, it's almost less about the Josh component in terms of it being, easy or hard to set up or kind of what it does by itself. It's about the integrated system. And so you want to make sure that you have a great network. You want to make sure that you've programmed your lights and your shades and your music and the TV and everything is interoperating the right way. And that just becomes a lot for a consumer to manage on their own. So what we do is we go through a pretty strong process where we vet certified installers around the country. They go through a training process, they get certified. And it means that if they're a certified Josh dealer, they understand the capabilities as well as the limitations. They understand how to deploy it, and they understand how to deliver a great experience. And so we've got certified installers all around the country. And you can always go through the Josh website to get connected to one, or just reach out to your local installer. And you'd be surprised, but a lot of them are already Josh dealers because it's growing pretty quickly.
And we would encourage people to go to bravas.com and find out where your local dealer is. I do have to ask, your logo is a dog. Is that Josh? Why Josh?
It's a great question. Short answer is we had the logo before we had the name, although it was kind of being designed in parallel. We knew that the system was essentially living with you at home, you're talking to it, but the idea of having it be a person or a robot just felt a little bit off. And when you think about giving commands, a dog makes sense, right? You're gonna say to a dog, come here, sit down, roll over, but you're not expecting a dog to answer, complicated math questions. And the idea is that we didn't want to set Josh up to be some brainiac when sometimes it's just turning on the lights. But the other thing is dogs watch over the house. There's a security component, man's best friend. So there was a lot of sort of value behind the dog. As we started really solidifying around the name Josh, which in many cases was a relatable name, something that we felt was, very familiar, very comfortable. If you Google the name Josh, one of the first things that comes up is Urban Dictionary, and it says, Josh is that guy, really shy at first, but when you get to know him, you'll fall in love. It just kind of fit perfectly. And so the dog logo, if you look at the ear, it's actually a J. We have a hidden J in that design.
That's great. Listen, I think this is a fast-growing segment for all of us. I think we're all excited. I'm excited that we're going to do more stuff with you guys. But before we let you go, we do this little game we play with most of our guests where we ask them 3 questions so we get to know a bit more about you, although we're all off to Google you as well in a minute. Look you up on YouTube anyway. So the first question is there, other than your JoshAI system, is there a piece of home technology you really love that you think you couldn't live without?
Oh, there's a lot that I couldn't live without. I'll give 2 very brief but different answers because of your caveat of couldn't live without. I'd say favorite these days is probably just my integrated Sonos experience, because I'm able to ask for any song, any artist, any album, or I just kind of ask Josh to surprise me with some music. And the way that we can work with Sonos, it's something that I use all the time. I love having music around. I'm not someone that likes to work in silence. I have different music I like in the morning or in the evening. And that experience is definitely high on my list. But when you said I couldn't live without, I immediately shifted mindset from Sonos to Lutron. Because even though I love my Sonos, if I had to, I probably could live without it. I couldn't live without my Lutron system. It's just, as important as electricity in my home. It's, it's my lighting, my shades. It's critical in how I live.
Once you've had lighting automation, it is really hard to go back to finding switches and things. So the second question is there a job that you did? Is there an assignment maybe JoshAI has had that you thought, wow, that was just amazing? What's your showcase story?
There are, again, 2 different answers that are very opposite that come to mind. The first one is for those who have seen the Josh keynote, and if not, Google it. It was a video that we shot in November. This was a Josh integrated environment in an $80 million spec home that had entire hydraulic walls that opened up. It had a sushi bar that disappeared. I mean, it was a pretty crazy home. And that was really cool in terms of the luxury space. But the opposite end of the spectrum, and the project that's probably more meaningful to me, is we had a dealer reach out that was deploying Josh in this. They described it as sort of a retreat center until we kind of dug in a little bit deeper and learned more. But it's for this facility called the Viscardi Center. And the Viscardi Center is a live-in school and sort of environment for disabled youth. And what was so interesting was they described these are children and kids and teenagers that might be missing limbs, they might be paraplegic, have different disabilities. And they were wanting to build Josh to allow these, amazing people to live better lives, to live, I don't want to say normal lives, but just lives that are more accessible. And for me, the idea that Josh can be used to really make someone's life more livable, like that's what motivates me. That's the stuff that I love. And so the $80 million home is awesome and like breathtaking, but I want to see more Viscardi centers because that's the stuff that really motivates us day to day.
I think that's great. And finally, the last question is there a piece of technology that you would like to invent or have invented that you don't think exists yet?
There's a lot that I've invented that I won't yet talk about that my company is building. So I obviously am excited about that. But in terms of stuff that I'm not directly working on, I got to meet this amazing entrepreneur probably 5 or 6 years ago, named Meredith, who was building a company called Ubeam. And I don't know the current state of it. I feel like it might not have fully worked out, but the vision behind Ubeam was wireless power in the home. And so instead of having to plug in your phone and plug in your computer and plug in appliances, the idea is, could we transmit power wirelessly in a safe and sustainable way without a ton of power loss? And how would that transform the home? The idea of not having outlets, the idea of truly just having everything charged, whether it's in your pocket or on a tabletop. And it's a little bit of science fiction at first, but you realize it's entirely doable. It's just expensive, and it's difficult to get long range. It's more of a short range solution today. But wireless power in the home is something that I'm very hopeful we'll start to see more of. I think these charging mats, these Qi chargers are cool, but wireless charging takes it to a whole nother level.
I agree. I think that'd be great. And I have to tell you, a lot more useful for me than an appearing sushi bar, which I think you'd have to service pretty well to keep it from being an unpleasant experience. Listen, Alex, I'm really grateful. I'm really excited that we can do more stuff with JoshAI. So we'll see what feedback we get, and maybe we'll have another conversation in a while. So thank you very much for joining us.
Of course, happy to be here, and always happy to chat again. And just for the audience, if anyone ever wants to reach out, I'm very accessible. You can always email me directly, just alex@josh.ai, or just go through the Bravas guys, because they all know how to reach me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time.